Kevin Stefanski said it was injury protocol, but when Hall of Famer Eric Dickerson spoke up, the entire narrative around the Cleveland Browns flipped on its head. What looked like a standard game day roster adjustment suddenly turned into something far more controversial, and if Dickerson's right, something deeply political. The supposed injury that sidelined rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders wasn't about health at all. It was about control. When news first broke that Shedeur was sitting out, most fans shrugged it off. Back tightness, they said. Just another cautious call from a coach protecting his young quarterback. But then came Dickerson, a man with no filter, no agenda other than truth, who called the whole thing what it was, a setup. According to him, the Browns didn't just bench Shedeur, they built an excuse around him. And suddenly, what had been a quiet injury report became the center of a storm that reached far beyond the football field. You could feel the ripple across the sports world almost instantly. Analysts who'd barely mentioned the Browns all season started asking questions. Why bench your most talented rookie when your offense is collapsing? Why announce an injury that no one saw happen? The timeline didn't make sense, the details didn't line up, and the silence from Cleveland only made it worse. To fans, it looked suspicious. To Dickerson, it looked calculated. And to those paying attention, it felt like something the NFL's done before, just wearing a different jersey this time. What made Dickerson's claim so explosive wasn't just what he said, but who said it. This wasn't some random insider stirring controversy for clicks. This was one of the most respected players in football history, a Hall of Famer with decades of experience, connections across the league, and nothing to gain by lying. When he looked straight into the camera and said the Browns had faked an injury to keep Shedeur Sanders off the field, it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like a whistle being blown. And here's where it hit differently. This wasn't just about Shedeur. This was about the name on his jersey, Sanders, because attached to that name is a legacy the league both celebrates and fears. Deion Sanders, the man who built an empire of confidence, culture, and charisma, has always walked a fine line with the NFL's establishment, loved by fans, respected by players, but never fully embraced by the league's power brokers. And now his son, Shedeur, was the one paying the price. The reaction online was instant. There's no way this is just coincidence. They're scared of another Deion. Others echoed the sentiment, calling it politics disguised as strategy. The Browns' handling of the situation didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised suspicions. Every detail, from the vague medical report to the sudden benching, started to feel less like a coaching decision and more like a cover story. But this wasn't just about rumors or theories. It was about what this moment symbolized, a clash between the old guard and a new generation of players who won't stay quiet, won't play the politics, and won't apologize for knowing their worth. Dickerson didn't just accuse a coach, he exposed a culture, a system that still, even in 2025, seems more comfortable controlling narratives than letting players write their own. The Browns might have hoped this would blow over, but it didn't. Because when a Hall of Famer calls out a franchise and says they're lying to keep a young black quarterback off the field, that's not drama, that's a reckoning. And in Cleveland, that reckoning just kicked off. But if you think that's where this story ends, think again, because the details of this so-called injury, they don't just raise questions, they expose a pattern. And once you see it, it's impossible to unsee.
It started as a single line on the injury report, back tightness. No explanation, no incident, no warning. Just enough to sound official, just vague enough to avoid questions. But that's exactly what made it suspicious. Because if you were watching warm-ups that day, you saw it. Shedeur Sanders wasn't limping. He wasn't wincing, he wasn't holding his back, or even moving differently. He was suited up, locked in, and ready to play. Everything about his body language said starter. Everything about the Browns' decision said something else. To most fans, it was confusing. To Eric Dickerson, it was infuriating. He didn't mince words. They made it up, he said flatly during a podcast appearance that quickly went viral. That kid was fine. That wasn't injury protocol, that was politics. And that's when the whispers began. Because as people started piecing the timeline together, the story really didn't make sense. There was no mention of back pain during practice, no limited reps, no media leaks from insiders hinting at discomfort, the kind of pregame chatter that always slips out when a player's truly hurt. Instead, everything appeared normal. Sanders had taken snaps, participated in team drills, and, according to teammates, looked sharper than ever. Then, suddenly, hours before kickoff, he was out. No warning, no press conference, no elaboration, just out. And that's when the internet detectives went to work. Clips surfaced showing Sanders throwing during warm-ups, his motion smooth and effortless. Fans slowed the footage down, frame by frame, looking for even the slightest sign of pain. Nothing. Not a flinch, not a wince, not a grimace. He looked ready, maybe even eager to prove something, but he never got the chance. So if it wasn't his health, what was it? That's the question Dickerson wanted people to start asking. Because in his words, this wasn't about protecting a player. It was about protecting a narrative. The Browns' offense had been collapsing week after week. Quarterbacks struggled, drives stalled. The team needed a spark, and everyone knew Shedeur had the potential to provide it. But sometimes, potential is a threat, especially when it belongs to a player connected to a man like Deion Sanders. Behind the scenes, insiders started suggesting there was tension brewing. Some speculated the coaching staff wasn't ready to hand over the keys to a rookie who already carried star power before ever taking a regular season snap. Others hinted that internal politics, locker room egos, management pressure, even brand image played a bigger role than anyone wanted to admit. Whatever the reason, the injury made the problem go away, at least temporarily. And that's the thing about convenient injuries. They don't need to last long. They just need to buy time. Time for coaches to dodge questions, time for management to rewrite a storyline, time for the media to move on. But Dickerson refused to move on. You don't just sideline a guy like that for back tightness, he said, not when your team can't score, not when your offense looks lost. That's not caution, that's cover. The more he said, the more sense it made. Because if the Browns truly wanted to protect Sanders, they'd be transparent about it. They'd issue updates, explain the recovery plan, give fans something concrete. But they didn't. They just let the mystery hang in the air like fog over First Energy Stadium. And that silence spoke louder than any statement. Players noticed too. A few dropped subtle comments on social media. Cryptic images, vague phrases about trust and truth. It wasn't direct, but it was enough to tell that not everyone in that locker room believed the official story either. Because players know when someone's hurt. They see it in practice, they feel it in the huddle. And in this case, they didn't see it at all.
So what really happened? Was it about a bruised back or bruised egos? Was it about protecting a player or protecting power? Because when a team that's desperate for offense chooses to bench its most talented young quarterback without warning, it's not strategy. It's something else entirely. And the deeper you dig into this so-called injury, the more it starts to look less like a medical issue and more like a message. A message to Shedeur, a message to Deion, and maybe a message to every player who dares to challenge how the league plays its off-field game. But if this was really about power, not pain, then we have to ask the question everyone's been avoiding. Who exactly is pulling the strings? Because as Dickerson hinted, the target wasn't just a player. It was a family legacy the NFL still doesn't know how to handle, and that's where things get personal. The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped into the NFL, he wasn't just a rookie. He was a symbol. The son of Deion Sanders, one of the most magnetic and polarizing figures in football history, Shedeur carried more than a last name. He carried a legacy the NFL still hasn't figured out how to manage. Deion changed the culture of the game. He made football loud, proud, and unapologetically confident. And that same energy, that charisma, that swagger is exactly what makes the NFL nervous when it shows up in the next generation. Because here's the truth. The league loves Deion's legend, but it fears his influence. It celebrates his highlight reels and charisma now, decades later, when he's a retired icon and not a disruptive force. But when that influence comes back into the locker room through his son, young, talented, and fully aware of his value, suddenly it's too much attention, too much media, too much pressure. The same energy that made Deion great has become something the league quietly tries to contain, and Shedeur is the perfect target for that control. Let's be real. This wasn't just about a quarterback with a back injury. This was about the optics of power. A Sanders name on an NFL jersey comes with more weight than most teams are comfortable handling. Deion's not just a father, he's a brand, a movement, a voice that doesn't bow to the system. He questions authority. He breaks tradition. He dares to believe that players can have control over their own image, something the NFL's old guard still struggles to accept. Now, imagine being a head coach like Kevin Stefanski, already under fire for an underperforming offense, suddenly being handed a quarterback who not only has talent, but carries a fan base before ever playing a down. That's not just a player, that's a spotlight. Every move, every play, every coaching decision would be dissected, compared, and possibly criticized by one of the biggest personalities in sports, Deion Sanders himself. To some coaches, that's not opportunity, that's threat. And that's what Eric Dickerson was getting at when he said this wasn't about football, this was about politics. It was about image management. It was about control. In his words, they're not just benching Shedeur, they're sending a message to Deion. Because when you bench the son, you silence the father. You sideline the voice that refuses to stay quiet. The NFL has always been a league of hierarchies, where power flows downward and players are expected to stay in line. Deion never played that game. And now his son is walking into the same system, carrying his father's confidence, but playing by his own rules. For a lot of executives, that's a problem. Because it's not just one outspoken man anymore. It's a generational mindset shift. It's a symbol that the system's control might be cracking. And the fear isn't just about what Shedeur represents on the field. It's about what he represents off it. The new era of athletes, self-branded, media-savvy, and unafraid to challenge the narrative. Players who don't need the league to define them because they already have their own platform. That's power, real power. And the NFL, like most old institutions, doesn't give that up easily. Think about how the league has handled figures like Deion before. Celebrated when convenient, criticized when disruptive. Praised for their talent, punished for their independence. Deion built his empire outside the NFL's comfort zone. First as a player who branded himself before branding was even a thing, and now as a coach who's rewriting college football's entire recruiting game. The man doesn't wait for permission. And Shedeur? He's proof that legacy doesn't skip a generation. It's no coincidence that Shedeur's draft slide to the 5th round felt like déjà vu for those who've watched how outspoken black quarterbacks have been treated before. The whispers weren't about his talent. They were about his fit, about his adjustment to NFL culture. Translation? Will he stay in line? Will he play by the rules? Because the league doesn't just draft athletes, it drafts personalities it can manage. And Shedeur, raised by a man who's never been managed by anyone, didn't fit that mold. That's why his benching hit differently. It wasn't just about a roster move, it was about making an example. The message was clear. No one, not even a Sanders, is bigger than the league. But here's where it backfired. The moment they tried to silence him, they proved the very thing they were trying to deny. That his presence is powerful. That his family name does make waves.
that even without taking a single snap, he commands more attention than most players who've been starting for years. And that's exactly what the league fears the most. Not scandal, not controversy, power. The kind that doesn't come from titles or contracts, but from influence. From the ability to shape the conversation instead of being shaped by it. Deion's legacy isn't just highlight reels and gold chains. It's the blueprint for how players can own their story. And now that blueprint has a sequel, written by Shedeur. The Browns might think they're managing a quarterback situation, but what they're really doing is stepping into a cultural storm that's far bigger than Cleveland. Because when a Sanders enters your system, you're not just coaching a player, you're confronting a legacy. And for a league built on control, that's the one game it's never known how to win. But this isn't just about legacy anymore. It's about patterns. And the deeper you look, the clearer they become. Because Shedeur's situation isn't unique. It's part of a story the NFL's been writing for decades. It just keeps changing the name on the jersey. This isn't the first time we've seen it. And everyone who's been around the game long enough knows it. The names change, the teams change, the headlines change, but the pattern stays the same. A talented, confident black quarterback steps into the spotlight, challenges the system with his presence alone, and suddenly the narrative starts to twist. Suddenly the story isn't about performance anymore. It's about attitude. It's about fit. It's about how he handles himself. Those are the coded phrases the league has used for decades when it wants to silence without saying it outright. Eric Dickerson didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. He's seen it before, up close, personal, and repeated like clockwork. You can trace it back through generations of players who were told they weren't ready, weren't disciplined enough, or weren't a system match. Those excuses have always been
a softer way of saying, you don't fit the mold we're comfortable with. And that mold has never been built for men who speak loudly, move differently, or shine too bright. Remember Colin Kaepernick? He took a knee and lost a career. Cam Newton? An MVP who got criticized more for his celebrations than praised for his statistics. Lamar Jackson? Called a running back playing quarterback even after dismantling defenses. Every time a player of color steps outside the NFL's unwritten script, the one that says, be grateful, be quiet, be manageable, the backlash isn't far behind. And now, Shedeur Sanders is standing in that same crossfire. Look at how the situation unfolded. It's textbook. Step 1. Build a public narrative that sounds reasonable. Injury concern. Step 2. Keep the story vague enough that no one can verify it. Step 3. When fans question it, deflect with coach speak about doing what's best for the team. It's the same PR playbook that's been used for decades to bury controversy without ever addressing the real issue, power and perception. The NFL has always been more than a game. It's a machine, a multi-billion-dollar image factory that thrives on control. Every player is a brand, but only within the boundaries the league approves. The moment someone, especially someone like Shedeur, walks into that system with their own platform, their own following, and their own story, the league sees risk, not potential. It's easier to sideline him than to share the spotlight. And when you zoom out, the trend becomes painfully clear. Black quarterbacks are celebrated when they win, tolerated when they conform, and punished when they challenge. The scrutiny is sharper, the leash is shorter, and the margin for error is microscopic. One bad game becomes a personality flaw. One confident quote becomes ego. One public disagreement becomes diva behavior. It's a cycle disguised as meritocracy, but everyone knows it's not about merit, it's about control. What makes Shedeur's situation sting even more is how familiar it feels. The Browns' move, dressing him up, letting him warm up, then quietly pulling him out with a fake injury, is a modern version of an old tactic: erase without explanation. They didn't have to say he was a problem. They just had to make him disappear from the game plan. And by the time fans start asking questions, the team's already moved on to next week's headlines. But Dickerson's voice broke that pattern, at least for now. Because when a Hall of Famer says what players have whispered for years, people listen. He didn't use coded language. He didn't dance around it. He said exactly what others are afraid to. This isn't coincidence. It's coordinated. It's deliberate. It's how the system protects itself. And maybe the most unsettling part, this pattern doesn't announce itself with drama. It's subtle. It's disguised as professionalism. It hides behind press conferences, medical jargon, and team-first rhetoric. You don't notice it until you've seen it happen enough times, and then it's impossible to ignore. Think about it. A young black quarterback with elite potential, who carries himself with poise, who's connected to one of the most iconic figures in sports, and instead of being celebrated, he's quietly sidelined for reasons that don't make sense. That's not an isolated incident. That's a reflection. A mirror of how the league still operates beneath the surface, where unwritten rules matter more than stats. The NFL doesn't have to say, "We're uncomfortable with outspoken players." It just has to keep finding reasons they can't play. And every time they do, it reinforces the same message to the next generation. Talent will take you far, but only if you stay in line.
Shedeur's story fits too neatly into that pattern to ignore. It's the same storyline recycled with new characters, playing out in front of millions of fans who are finally starting to notice the script. And this time, the whistle didn't come from a journalist or an anonymous source. It came from one of the league's own legends, standing up and saying, "I've seen this movie before." The scary part? He's right. Because every generation of the NFL has its version of Shedeur Sanders, a player with the skill to change the game and the spirit to question it. And every generation, the league finds a way to silence them just long enough to keep control. But maybe this time it won't work. Because the old playbook, the one that buries truth behind team decisions, doesn't hold up when fans can see everything, rewind everything, and talk about everything in real time. The pattern's no longer invisible. It's exposed. And once a pattern is exposed, it's only a matter of time before someone breaks it. And that someone might just be Shedeur Sanders. Because the Browns thought they were keeping him off the field. But what they really did was put him at the center of a movement. Kevin Stefanski stood on the sideline that day, calm, collected, and unreadable. The same stoic face he's shown every Sunday since becoming head coach of the Cleveland Browns. But beneath that calm exterior, something felt off. This wasn't just another coaching decision, another lineup tweak. This was a move that didn't make football sense. And when something doesn't make football sense, it usually makes political sense. When Eric Dickerson dropped his bombshell that Stefanski had allegedly fabricated Shedeur Sanders' injury to justify keeping him off the field, it sent shockwaves through the league. Coaches get criticized all the time, but this was different. This was an accusation of manipulation, of deception, of using a player as a pawn in a much bigger game. And once that idea was out there, it couldn't be taken back. At first, the Browns front office went silent. No denial, no statement, no press release to clarify or defend their coach, just radio silence. And in the NFL, silence isn't damage control. It's confirmation that there's something worth hiding. Reporters tried pressing Stefanski after the game, asking for details about Shedeur's condition. His answers were short, evasive, carefully worded. It's just precautionary. He wasn't ready to go. No elaboration, no timeline, no evidence. Just enough to move to the next question. But that's exactly what made it worse. Because while the Browns coach brushed it off like routine strategy, fans and analysts were already connecting dots. They remembered the footage of Shedeur warming up, throwing, stretching, laughing, moving freely. They remembered his post-game comment, calm but pointed. "I was good to play." It didn't sound like a man recovering from pain. It sounded like one trying not to start a war. And if Stefanski thought this would all blow over quietly, he underestimated two things: Eric Dickerson's reach and Deion Sanders' influence. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Sports talk shows debated it. Players subtweeted it. Comment sections exploded. Suddenly, Stefanski wasn't just a coach struggling with an underperforming offense. He was a man accused of lying to the league, his players, and the fans. Now, whether you believe Dickerson's version or not, one thing's undeniable: the optics were disastrous. You can't bench your most talked about rookie during a season when your offense is dead last. Claim injury, and then fail to back it up with a single medical update. It's the kind of decision that burns credibility, not just with fans, but inside the locker room. Players notice when one of their own gets treated unfairly. They talk, they lose trust, and once that trust cracks, a coach's voice doesn't hit the same anymore. Several insiders began whispering that Stefanski's control over the locker room was already slipping before this incident. Some players reportedly questioned his judgment, not openly, but through subtle body language, sideline conversations, and quiet frustration that builds up like rust. The Shedeur situation didn't cause that, it exposed it. Because when a coach starts making decisions that don't line up with performance, players start wondering who's really calling the shots. And that's the part Dickerson wanted people to focus on. Not just the fake injury itself, but what it symbolized. If the accusation is true, Stefanski wasn't acting as a football coach that day. He was acting as a company man, protecting the system, protecting the image, protecting his job. It's the kind of move that says, I'm not here to build talent, I'm here to keep order. But order without fairness isn't leadership, it's control. It's ironic, really. Coaches are supposed to preach accountability, next man up, earn your spot, compete every day. Yet when the time came to apply those same principles, Stefanski allegedly chose politics over performance. And now that decision is haunting him. Because when you manipulate the truth in a league built on stats, tape, and transparency, the lie eventually catches up. The fallout's already beginning. Analysts are questioning his judgment, former players are calling for an internal review, fans are demanding answers. The narrative that once painted Stefanski as a disciplined, level-headed coach has shifted. Now he's being described as evasive, untrustworthy, even calculating. And the more he avoids the subject, the deeper that perception sets in. Even the Browns' higher-ups can't ignore it forever. You can't run a franchise on controversy and secrecy, not when your season's slipping away and your fan base is losing faith. Every press conference that doesn't mention Shedeur's name, every game where he stays on the sidelines, feels like confirmation that the rumors were right all along. The most telling moment came a few days after Dickerson's statement, when a reporter asked Stefanski if he'd heard the allegations. His answer? I don't pay attention to outside noise. But this wasn't noise. This was a Hall of Famer accusing him of dishonesty. And his refusal to even address it spoke volumes. Sometimes what a man doesn't say reveals more than what he does. So where does that leave Stefanski? Caught between two collapsing fronts, one on the field, one off it. His team can't score, his locker room's losing faith, and now his integrity's being questioned publicly by legends of the game. For a coach already rumored to be on the hot seat, this isn't just a distraction, it's a fuse. And it's burning fast. Because if this was really a calculated move, if Stefanski did fake that injury to sideline a player for reasons that had nothing to do with football, it's not just poor judgment, it's a breach of trust that could define his career. Coaches are hired to develop talent, not bury it, to lead men, not manipulate them. And right now, the man supposed to lead the Browns looks less like a coach and more like a cover-up artist in team gear.
But even if the truth stays hidden for now, one thing's for sure, the fallout has already begun. The Browns' offense can recover, the locker room can heal, but reputation? That's harder. Once a coach's credibility cracks, it never fully glues back together. And if the whispers around the league are true, If Stefanski really helped write this script, then the story isn't just about Shedeur anymore. It's about the system that rewards silence, punishes authenticity, and still fears the kind of player it can't control. And that's the part Stefanski can't coach his way out of. Because the truth doesn't need a press conference, it just needs time. And the clock's already running. While everyone else was talking, speculating, and pointing fingers, Shedeur Sanders stayed silent. No cryptic tweets, no fiery interviews, no passive-aggressive comments about the coaching staff, just quiet composure. And that silence spoke louder than any soundbite could. Because in a league built on noise, the calmest man in the room is usually the one who knows exactly what's going on. When the story first broke, reporters hounded him for a quote. They wanted outrage, they wanted confirmation, they wanted a headline that matched the chaos. But Shedeur didn't give them one. Instead, he offered a simple, measured statement that told you everything you needed to know without saying much at all. I was good to play. No anger, no bitterness, just truth, clean, controlled, and impossible to spin. That single sentence undercut the Browns' entire injury narrative. What made it more powerful was how he carried himself afterward. Game after game, he stayed present. On the sideline, he was focused, clipboard in hand, headset on, talking to teammates, staying involved like a leader who knew his time would come. While other rookies might have sulked or distanced themselves, Shedeur stayed locked in, professional to the core. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. He was letting the situation expose itself, and it did. There's a reason Deion Sanders always preaches discipline wrapped in swagger, because that's how you win battles that can't be fought on the field. Shedeur learned that early. He didn't need to clap back or defend himself online. He knew that every snap the Browns' offense failed to convert made his case for him. The worse they looked without him, the louder his presence became. Silence turned into a weapon. Inside the locker room, teammates noticed too. According to insiders, several veterans quietly expressed respect for how Shedeur handled the situation. "Dude's solid," one reportedly said. "Doesn't talk, just works." And that's the thing about authenticity. It doesn't need PR. Players know real when they see it. They see the body language, the work ethic, the restraint. They can tell when someone's not playing the politics. Shedeur wasn't trying to win a PR war. He was playing the long game. And the longer this saga dragged on, the more fans started to shift sides. Early on, people wondered if maybe the Browns knew something the public didn't. But as the injury stretched from one game to another, with no updates, no progress, and no transparency, the narrative started turning. Free Shedeur began trending among Browns fans. Analysts began questioning why the rookie wasn't being developed, especially when the offense was bottom tier. The public started seeing what Dickerson had pointed out. This wasn't about health or performance. It was about control. Through it all, Shedeur didn't bite. He didn't confirm or deny Dickerson's claims. He didn't attack Stefanski. He didn't even comment on the speculation surrounding his father. Instead, he leaned on
What Deion had always taught him. Let them talk, then let your play do the talking. And that's exactly what made his silence so dangerous to the people trying to suppress him. Because when you can't provoke a player into reacting, you lose your power over them. It wasn't apathy, it was awareness. Shedeur knew what was being done to him, and he understood the stakes. One wrong move, one angry comment, one viral clip could give the Browns justification to paint him as immature or emotional. That's how the league traps players like him, through perception. But Shedeur didn't give them that. He gave them poise, and in doing so, he turned the narrative inside out. That composure also reflects something deeper, a kind of faith that doesn't come from arrogance, but from clarity. Shedeur knows who he is. He knows what he represents. He's not just Deion's son, he's his own man, walking his own path, but carrying his father's wisdom like armor. Every time the camera cut to him on the sideline, standing tall, eyes forward, unshaken, it sent a message. You can sit me down, but you can't break me. And that's what terrifies the system most, because control only works when it gets a reaction.
When the person you're trying to sideline refuses to crumble, your manipulation loses its grip. Stefanski might have thought keeping Shedeur on the bench would make him invisible, but the opposite happened. Every shot of him waiting patiently on the sideline told a story, not of defeat, but of quiet defiance. Even Deion, known for his passion and fire, mirrored his son's restraint. No angry tweets, no public feud, just subtle words of encouragement and faith. That's legacy in action, teaching your son that the loudest statement is sometimes the one you don't make. And make no mistake, that strategy worked, because while the Browns stumbled week after week, fans began to view Shedeur not as a benched rookie, but as a symbol of something bigger: patience, professionalism, and the calm before the storm. There's an old saying, still waters run deep, and that's Shedeur right now, still but deep, waiting, not because he has to, but because he knows that when the time comes, he'll be ready. Every snap he doesn't take now is fuel for the moment he finally steps onto the field and proves what everyone's been whispering, that the Browns didn't bench him because he wasn't good enough. They benched him because he was too good. And when that moment comes, it won't just be redemption for him, it'll be vindication for every player who's been told to wait their turn while watching less talented names take the field for reasons that had nothing to do with skill. So Shedeur waits, calm, composed, and dangerously patient, because he doesn't need to win the argument, he just needs to win the game. And when he finally does, the same system that tried to silence him will have to face the one truth it can't spin or fake: talent always outlasts politics. At this point, it's clear, this story stopped being about one quarterback and one coach a long time ago. What's happening with Shedeur Sanders and Kevin Stefanski isn't an isolated controversy. It's a reflection of something much bigger, something that's been simmering in the NFL for years. The tug-of-war between control and change.
Predictability over potential. Obedience over originality. In their world, players are assets, not individuals. Image management comes before innovation, and every voice that gets too loud, too confident, or too independent becomes a problem to solve, not a person to support. On the other side stands the new generation, players like Shedeur, who've grown up in the era of social media, branding, and self-ownership. They understand that they are the product. They don't wait for permission to tell their story, they post it. They don't rely on press conferences to control the narrative. They live it in real time. And to a league built on gatekeeping, that's terrifying. Because for the first time, the NFL can't completely control its image. The players can. Shedeur embodies that shift perfectly. He's not brash or reckless. He's disciplined, media-savvy, calm under pressure. Everything a team should want in a franchise quarterback. But he also carries something that threatens the system: autonomy. He doesn't need the NFL to validate him. He came into the league with a brand, a following, and a legacy already attached to his name. That's power the system didn't grant him, and power the system doesn't know how to contain. This is why his benching hit such a nerve, because it exposed how far the league will go to maintain its hierarchy. In the NFL's playbook, a player like Shedeur isn't supposed to walk in ready-made. He's supposed to earn everything from scratch, be humbled, molded, and shaped by the system before he's allowed to lead. But how do you humble someone who's already proven himself on every level he's touched, who's already learned from one of the greatest minds in football history at home? You can't. So instead, you suppress him. You hide him behind injuries, behind depth charts, behind developmental timelines. It's the same cycle that's played out for decades, the system testing whether players will bend or break. Most bend, some break, but a few, like Shedeur, don't move at all. They stay patient, composed, and let the truth expose itself. That's not weakness, that's evolution. And that's what the old guard can't stand. Evolution that doesn't ask for approval. Because for them, the NFL isn't just about winning games, it's about preserving power. Power over who gets to rise. power over which stories are told, power over what kind of player represents the league's image. But every generation, someone comes along who flips that dynamic on its head. Someone who forces the system to choose between staying comfortable or staying relevant. That's the crossroads the NFL is standing at right now. It's not about the Browns. It's not even about Stefanski or Shedeur specifically. It's about what their story represents. A league that claims to celebrate individuality, but only when that individuality doesn't challenge the hierarchy. A system that claims to be colorblind, yet continues to treat confident black athletes as risks when they refuse to be silent. And here's the part the league's not ready for. Fans are evolving too. The NFL used to control the narrative because fans only knew what the teams told them. Now, everyone's watching in real time. They see the contradictions. They see the players warming up healthy while being listed as injured. They see the patterns repeating from generation to generation. And they're not buying the old excuses anymore. That's what makes this story so dangerous for the establishment. Because once fans start questioning motives, the machine starts cracking. Once players start realizing they can't be controlled by silence, the balance of power shifts. And once legends like Eric Dickerson start calling it out publicly, that shift becomes irreversible.
The league can try to downplay this, but the truth is it's already losing control. The same tactics that once kept players in check, media spin, reputation management, fear of being labeled difficult, don't work the same way anymore. Because players like Shedeur aren't playing for approval, they're playing for legacy. And here's the irony. The NFL has always marketed itself as the shield, a symbol of strength, unity, and control. But that same shield is now what's being pierced by the very stars who make it shine. The league can't keep pretending that protecting its image is the same as protecting its players. Fans see through that now. They don't want polished PR. They want transparency. They want accountability. The Browns might think this controversy begins and ends with them, but it doesn't. It's part of a much larger conversation that's echoing across every locker room in the league. One question that coaches, executives, and players are all quietly asking themselves: who really runs the game now? Is it the league office with its scripted statements and press control? Or is it the new generation of athletes who don't need the system's approval to be stars? That's the bigger fight: control versus change. And no matter how long the old guard clings to power, change always wins in the end, because talent, truth, and time have one thing the system never will: momentum. And right now, all that momentum is building behind Shedeur Sanders. The Browns might have tried to bench him, but they may have just sparked something far greater: a quiet revolution. One that isn't happening in press rooms or board meetings, but in the minds of players watching, thinking, and realizing they don't have to play by the old rules anymore. Because control is temporary, but change is inevitable. Every story has a moment where the balance shifts, a single point where silence turns into pressure, and pressure turns into power. For Shedeur Sanders, that moment is no longer approaching, it's already here. The Browns might have written him off as a quiet rookie, a piece they could keep on the shelf until it suited their plans. But what they didn't realize is that every week he sat, every snap he didn't take, every interview he didn't give was building something unstoppable: momentum. You can feel it now, in the locker room, in the fan base, across sports media. The patience that once looked like compliance has started to look like defiance. The calm that once looked like silence now feels like strength. People are talking, fans are questioning, players are watching. And the longer this charade drags on, the clearer it becomes that the narrative isn't slipping away from Cleveland, it's sprinting. Because this is what always happens when you try to suppress talent. The truth doesn't fade, it festers. It grows under the surface until it can't be ignored anymore. And when it finally breaks through, it doesn't whisper, it explodes. For the Browns, the situation has gone from coach's decision to franchise crisis. The offense keeps floundering, the fans are restless, the national spotlight, once dim, is now blinding. And all the while, standing on that sideline in full uniform, helmet in hand, is the player who could change it all, the one they refuse to play. Every game he's benched, every loss that piles up, makes the Browns look less like a football team and more like a machine trying to protect its pride.
And pride has a cost. Kevin Stefanski's once steady image as a composed, strategic leader is crumbling under the weight of questions he won't answer. What's really going on with Shedeur Sanders? Is the injury story legit? Has the locker room lost faith? Those aren't questions a coach can sidestep forever. Every deflection erodes trust. Every vague answer sounds more like guilt. You can feel the tide turning, not in the media, but in the people who matter most, the fans. Because fans aren't naive anymore. They've seen too much, learned too much, and connected too many dots. They know when something doesn't add up. They know when a player is being benched for reasons that don't exist on the stat sheet. And when they turn, when the people who buy the tickets, wear the jerseys, and control the conversation decide you've crossed the line, no PR spin in the world can save you. And that's exactly what's happening now. The calls for transparency are getting louder. The comparisons to other silenced players, Kaepernick, Newton, even Lamar in his early years, are resurfacing. Analysts who once dismissed Dickerson's accusations as theories are starting to admit that the timeline, the optics, the complete lack of medical evidence, none of it makes sense. Meanwhile, Shedeur hasn't changed his demeanor. He still shows up early, still practices hard, still studies film like his number could be called any minute. That's what makes this the ultimate irony. He's doing everything right, while the people around him keep making the wrong moves. He's showing the league exactly what kind of leader he is without ever taking a snap. And in doing so, he's proving Eric Dickerson right. This was never about performance. But here's where it all turns. Because in the NFL, image doesn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, every false narrative collapses under its own weight. And when it does, the truth doesn't just come out, it detonates. One statement, one leak, one insider confirmation is all it takes for the floodgates to open. And when that happens, it won't just be a story about a coach and a quarterback. It'll be about a system finally being held accountable for the way it controls players, especially players who don't fit its mold. That's what makes this the turning point, because for the first time in years, the power dynamic is shifting in real time, not in boardrooms, not behind closed doors, but out in the open, where everyone can see it. It's the moment when the league has to decide what it really stands for. Will it keep protecting the image of control, or will it finally let the game evolve with the generation that's already redefining it? Will it keep benching players who challenge the system, or start embracing the ones who represent its future? Because here's the truth. You can't bury a story that refuses to die. You can't silence a player who hasn't even started talking yet. And you can't stop change when it's already in motion. Shedeur Sanders doesn't have to expose anyone. He doesn't need to tweet, rant, or retaliate. His existence, his composure, his talent, his bloodline is exposure enough. He represents a future the league can't control, but will eventually have to accept. So when people ask, what happens next? The answer's simple. Inevitability.
The Browns can keep pretending this is about injury. Stefanski can keep dodging questions. The league can keep pretending it's business as usual. But everyone watching knows what's really happening. The truth is circling, and it's getting closer with every passing week. And when it finally breaks, when Shedeur gets his shot, whether in Cleveland or somewhere else, it won't just be another game, it'll be a reckoning. Because that first snap will mean more than football. It'll mean the narrative they tried to control has slipped completely out of their hands. The NFL can delay the moment, it can shuffle the depth charts and hide behind press statements, but it can't stop what's coming. Because Shedeur's story isn't just a controversy, it's a countdown. And when the clock hits 0, the entire league will realize what the Browns tried so hard to bury. You can fake an injury. You can fake a statement. But you can't fake destiny.